the Wingspace podcast. This podcast is not a replacement for mental health treatment or professional health care. In case of crisis or emergency, please contact your local healthcare provider or dial 911. In today's episode, you may notice a slight fluctuation in the audio quality. We appreciate your patience and understanding while we learn how to create the best possible recordings for our listeners. Hey there, and welcome to the Wingspace podcast, the place to take up space. Glad you're with me today to dive into this concept of wellness. As you may or may not know, I am the owner of Hope and Healing Therapy and Wellness Center. And while most people understand therapy and what that is, you might be wondering, what's the wellness piece of Hope and Healing Therapy and Wellness Center? And why are they put together? So just to give you a little bit of background, when I opened my practice in 2018, I initially wanted to add alternative intervention. So from the very beginning, I had walk and talk therapy as a part of our modality. So sometimes we would meet in the office and go for a walk, and sometimes we would just stay in the office. It just depended on what was going on with the particular client. And I began to have so many conversations and discussions with clients about many components of wellness: their physical health, their relationships, their jobs, all of the things that really play into this concept of wellness. And so I just want to dive into that a little bit today. I am using a guide for our conversation today. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration put together a really great visual, and I can link it in our show notes so that you can really dive into it if you want. But I just want to have a conversation about the 8 components of wellness and how they play into our daily life. So again, some of what I'm going to share with you today is from this manual, and some of what you're going to get is my own original material, kind of all meshed in together. The really important thing to think about as we start this conversation about wellness is that it's not a cookie cutter approach, and that what works for one person is not going to work for another, and it's really not going to look the same. So when I talk about these 8 aspects of wellness, it's not going to be this, like I said, cookie cutter, everybody fits into a mold. Because what's also going to happen is that it's going to change for different people at different times. So first of all, what is wellness? Wellness is this idea of health and the many dimensions of our life, and that things are kind of in balance and in check. So if you think about your physical health, for instance, we know what a healthy person typically looks like. So, the blood work is good, the weight is good, the overall physical health is good, and that's what we consider healthy. But really, there's so many other aspects of health and wellness that we're going to dive into today. And really, it's about having things in a good place so that it looks and feels healthy, not only to you, but to maybe the outside world as well. It's important to remember also that culture plays a huge role in health and wellness. So when we talk about the components of wellness today, there's also this multicultural component that sometimes it has to change for certain cultures or certain cultural expectations, and some folks aren't able to really give all the attention that's needed in some aspects because of cultural demands and expectations, and I want to respect that. But really, we want to look at how, regardless of cultural expectations, how do we live our lives, and where do we find joy and fulfillment? So if you can, I'm going to take you back to elementary school, and I'm not really sure what class this would have been in, maybe science class, but we're looking at Venn diagrams. So you remember there's lots of circles and they overlap, and the things they have in common are where the circles overlap, and the things that they don't have in common are outside of that overlapping circles. So I want you to imagine 8 circles that are overlapping, but also have some components of their own. And when we look at these 8 components, these 8 circles that create this Venn diagram of wellness, we're looking at social, emotional, spiritual, intellectual, physical, environmental, financial, and occupational. Whew, that's a lot. But if you break down all of the components of our life, everything falls into one of those categories. I want you to also think about this idea of balance. Some people think about balance as an equilibrium. You know, you imagine the scale and it's balanced. There's equal time and energy on each side or each component of the scale. And really, that's not what health and wellness is about. It's not about making sure that I'm being all things for all people at all times and in all places. It's more about making sure that we have time to do the things that make us happy and help us to feel fulfilled. And I realize that not everything in life is going to be roses and rainbows, and there are going to be times when things are difficult. However, ultimately, what we are looking for is an opportunity to be able to find that place of joy and fulfillment. So not only is this going to look different for everyone, but it's also going to look different for each of us at different seasons in our life. So when you are a single person, not married, no children, your Venn diagram of wellness is going to look a little bit different than, let's say, a new parent or a parent who's empty nesting, or even a senior citizen who's living out retirement life. So I think that it's really important to think that, again, there's no cookie cutter approach, and what works for you may not work for me, or what worked for me now may not work for me in another season of my life. And we're gonna talk about how some of those things in life change, and it impacts things in ways that we might not have otherwise considered. So 8 components of wellness. We're going to go through all of them today in a little bit more depth, and maybe just providing you with a couple of examples of what that looks like in terms of finding wellness and health within that component. Towards the end of our segment, we're going to talk a little bit about habits and routines, but I could do, and I will do, a whole new episode regarding how to make and keep healthy habits and routines. So if this feels overwhelming to you, I want you to just take the information. Maybe you have to listen to it a couple of times, and that's totally okay. Don't feel like you have to jump into all 8 aspects of wellness at the same time. It's about baby steps. The other thing to keep in mind is that this podcast, this episode or any other episodes in this podcast, is not a substitute for any kind of medical care that you might need. So if you have physical concerns or you have emotional concerns, you need to make sure that you're reaching out to your primary care provider or a licensed mental health provider. If there are spiritual concerns, you can certainly reach out to a clergyman. But this is in no way intended to be a substitute for your own individualized care. This really is just about information so that you can be informed to make decisions going forward. So I want to start with emotional wellness. That seems like the most logical place for a mental health provider to start. Now, this is not because it's the most important. It's just because it seemed like a good place to start from my perspective. When you think about emotional wellness, we're looking at how we express feelings, our ability to express feelings, how we can adjust to emotional challenges and experiences we have in our life, how we cope with life stressors, and all of us experience stress in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's good stress or bad stress, we all experience it. So how do we cope with that? And then how do we enjoy life? And even when stress is really high, for some people, there's still ways to enjoy life. So, we're looking at our feelings, our emotions. Some of that is a physical sensation in our body because we know that emotions are felt within our body. but really we're talking about that emotional component, that the feelings, when people say, oh, well, I feel happy or I feel sad, right? That's what we're talking about. How do you express your feelings? Do you express your feelings? Do you feel like you experience a full array of emotions? Some people say, well, I don't really feel emotions, or my emotions aren't intense. Some people are really emotional and some people are not. And it's true that we all experience emotions differently, not only based on the way that we're hardwired, but also our environments that we're brought up in. And some people are taught that you can experience emotions, and some people are taught that you should not. So, how are those emotions expressed, and how are they felt? Not only how are they expressed in terms of outwardly, but also how are they expressed inwardly? Sometimes we really beat ourselves up about the way that we feel about a situation, and other people don't realize that. We put that mask on, we cover it up, we kind of put on a good front, but really we're beating ourselves up about it. So we're looking at, sure, the expression of emotion is important, but we're also looking at what does it physically feel like, and what's that emotion that we're having inside of us. And that can really be impacted by stress. I mentioned we all experience stress, good stress, bad stress. How do we adjust? How are we flexible? How do we anticipate stress? A really important component of stress is this idea of stress management. And certainly we may not be able to manage the things that happen in our life that cause us stress, but we can manage how we respond and whether or not we're able to prevent some of those things. Which leads me into the last component of emotional wellness, which is self-care. So when we think about stress management, I immediately think about coping skills, and I think about building resiliency. And a lot of that is included in self-care. And people might say, well, self-care is selfish, or you shouldn't put yourself first. And I'm here to tell you that if you do not fill your bucket, nobody else will. And if you are constantly giving to other people, at some point, the well is going to run dry. And so if you don't get anything else out of this podcast today, I would say that self-care is essential to overall health and wellness. Now, when you think about self-care, let's also look at this idea of coping skills. So coping skills can be preventative, or they can be used as an intervention. And those preventative coping skills are the things that I consider self-care: good habits, good routines, exercise, engaging in things that give us pleasure, whether it's a social group or a hobby, taking a bath, getting a massage, going for a walk, playing with our dog, listening to music, all of those things that kind of keep us in a good place. It helps to reduce the outward exposure to stress. We can kind of close off the world a little bit, listen to some music, we can meditate, we can pray, all of those sorts of things. Or we can engage in activities with other people as a preventative measure. It helps to, for some of us, engaging with other people is a huge stress reliever. For some of us, engaging with people is a huge stressor, so you have to balance what works for you. How do you incorporate preventative coping skills into your regular routines? And that's sometimes where people consider that self-care. So morning routines. I heard on a podcast yesterday this idea of bookend habits. So how do you start your day and how do you end your day? Are you waking up, hitting snooze a bunch of times, and you're frazzled from the day, and then you're running out the door, the kids are running out the door, everybody's kind of yelling and screaming because you're hurry up, and then you're hurried and harried wherever you're going? Or do you have an opportunity to have a slower start, not a perfect morning, but a slower start to the morning that allows you to not be so stressed going into the day? And then how do you end your day? Are you ending it, falling in bed with all the chaos of the day kind of still going on around you? Are you just kind of putting everybody to bed and then turning the lights off and then laying there forever wondering when you're going to get to sleep? Is there exercise involved? Is there sunshine and fresh air and those sorts of things, right? So preventative things. And then we look at interventions. And sometimes the things we do for preventative self-care and stress management are the same as interventions. So, there are times when I am feeling really energized in my body because I've been dealing with a lot of stress at work or at home or wherever it might be. And so I go for a run. It's an intervention, right? Because I'm starting to feel that stress and I'm going for a run because I want to intervene and I want to stop the stress cycle. I could also, and I do, go for runs just as a matter of wellness and my exercise routine. Some people meditate or pray or do yoga or exercise classes, listen to music as prevention, but that's also their go-to when they're starting to feel the stress of the day. They might take a break, they might go for a walk, they might step aside. As parents, we often tell our kids to take a time out. When do we give ourselves permission to take a time out and really step away from the day? So looking at emotional wellness, it's a big component of the work that I do from a therapeutic standpoint, because we're dealing with stress, we're dealing with emotions, we're dealing with that concept of self-care and coping skills. The other really important component of the work that we do is intellectual wellness. So this is the second component, intellectual wellness, because in therapy and as we look at as we look at feelings and emotions, we then have to look at thoughts. And sometimes through the course of therapeutic work, we look at thoughts are what drive emotion. So if you're looking at like a cognitive behavioral concept, it's, something happens, we have a thought that leads to an emotion that leads to a behavior. So the thoughts are really key. When we look at intellectual wellness, we want to make sure that we're keeping our brains active and that we're expanding our potential and kind of engaging our brain. Now, we can do this in many different ways, and it's important to think about kind of intentionally how you're going to do this. Now, some of the things that you're going to do for emotional wellness are going to fall right into this. So reading, crossword puzzles, Sudoku puzzles, meditation, all of those things are engaging the brain, and they're excellent opportunities to work on your intellectual health. Also with self-care, you're potentially going to be looking at hobbies and interests. So when we look at intellectual wellness, we're looking at what are your personal interests? Are you engaging in classes, or maybe you're teaching a class? Maybe you're sitting with a friend and teaching them how to knit, or you're helping someone with woodworking, or something that you're interested in. We learn really well by teaching other people. It engages our brain. So maybe you're using your personal interests in a way to be able to teach someone. It doesn't have to be a formal class. It can just be, your niece or your nephew or your child or your friend, a family member. Do you enjoy reading? Are you reading? Are you expanding on your interests? Maybe, there's been times that I've started a book and it's really outside of the genre that I typically like, but I push through because it's engaging my brain in a way that those other books don't. Sometimes I can just fly through a book and I feel like I maybe didn't even read it all. But when we read outside of our genre or read something different, maybe we're going to read the newspaper or we're going to read a magazine. I know that sometimes we look at social media and we're just scrolling and we think we're reading, but we're really not. We're just scrolling. We're kind of skimming. It's almost like when you window shop at a mall or an outside mall of some kind. You're just looking. You're not really paying attention to what you're going to buy. Similar to when you're scrolling on social media, you're not really paying attention. Your brain is picking up information. So let's keep that in mind. Your brain is still picking up information, but you're not necessarily aware of it. So, with personal interest, are you kind of pushing those limits just a little bit, maybe thinking outside of the box, engaging in something new? Maybe you invite a friend, so that social aspect of emotional wellness and engaging in relationships can also be incorporated. Education, are you continuing your education? You may be a person that said, I have learned everything I need to learn. Well, I had a friend recently that is in her very early 50s and said that she learned this summer that she can go to the senior center and engage in classes because she's over 50, and she's been having the time of her life going to those classes, and she's going to Zumba and chair yoga and different craft classes. it's free. It's an opportunity to engage socially. It's an opportunity to learn something new. Hand-eye coordination, patience, all of those things are great opportunities. So maybe you learned something. Maybe you're in a place where you're thinking, I want to go back to school. I need to take some continuing education. Maybe this is your invitation to go ahead and do that because you want to keep your brain fresh and you want to keep your mind going. Certainly brain exercises are a great opportunity. I've had some experience working in long-term care, and we try to get folks engaged in, crossword puzzles and word finds and Sudoku and just things that keep your brain moving. Because just like with any other muscle in your body, if you stop using it, it stops being useful to us. So it's really that like use it or lose it component. And we know from research that keeping the brain active, using the brain, engaging the brain, not just going through the day as a just routine and habit, but doing things differently or doing something new is really important for brain health. And the last piece about intellectual wellness is conversation and talking to people. So, we talked about how self-care can include other people in that, and we now know from intellectual wellness that conversation and having face-to-face discussions with people is really important to keep your mind going, because you don't necessarily know what the person in front of you or beside you is going to say, and so your brain is having to decide what the conversation is going to be, which leads us to social wellness. So with emotional wellness and intellectual wellness, we have been talking about kind of what's inside of us, how we can engage in the outside world, but what's inside of us. So with social wellness, we're really looking at our capacity to be able to engage with other people, and having healthy relationships with family and friends and the community at large, having interests in and concerns about other people, other activities, and just mankind in general, humankind in general. If we think about it from a big perspective, being engaged in the community. So are there activities in your community that you might want to attend? Because of other events we had going on, I didn't have the opportunity, but our local community here had the world's biggest duck here in Leonardtown over the weekend, and I don't know that I've ever seen so many people going in and through Leonardtown from the pictures that have been posted and shared. And what a way to engage with your community, with businesses that you might not normally engage with people that maybe you only see every now and again, and just the fun and laughter of seeing people dressed up like ducks and yellow shirts and all the rubber ducky stuff, just engaging in the community, meeting new people, new interests, new hobbies, new people with new experiences really helps to impact your social wellness. We know that social interaction is really, really important. I'm recording this episode in August of 2023, and I can take you back to August of 2020, and all of us remember that the pandemic was really hot and heavy at that point, and all of us were staying indoors. We were keeping our bubbles really, really close because we wanted to stay healthy and we wanted to stay well. And so many people lost social interaction, and their social wellness significantly declined because they were not engaging in the community. I know for myself, there were times that, I might have a hat on my head and a mask on my face, and if I really wanted to go incognito, I'd put some sunglasses on, and then I could go in the store, I could go grocery shopping and not have to speak to a soul because nobody knew who I was, because I was, completely cut off. I didn't do it purposefully, but sometimes it just happened, and then I realized, wow, I went through that whole store and never even made eye contact with anyone. And sometimes it's just a matter of a hello, how are you? And considering, as we talked about conversation and intellectual wellness, how often have you said to someone in passing on the street or in a store, hey, how are you? And they don't respond. So maybe the next time somebody says to you, hey, how are you? You actually answer the question instead of using it as a simple phrase that means hello. And as we engage with our community and as we engage with new people, we then have an opportunity for social time. again, these are all intertwined, right? Because we know with intellectual wellness, having conversations and being engaged with other people helps to keep our brain well, and emotional wellness helps us to, with emotional wellness, we're going to engage with other people through self-care and stress management. So these three we can already see where they are intertwined. And from a mental health perspective and from the hope and healing therapy and wellness component of what we do, obviously emotional wellness, we're talking about the therapy aspect of what we do, the psychotherapy, sitting down and having a session with a therapist. But we also have opportunities for wellness workshops where certainly we're talking about emotional wellness, but we're also providing some, maybe it's a girls' night out or a date night out. So you're having social interaction with someone. You're learning something new. So we're targeting the intellectual wellness. When you come into a therapy session with a cognitive behavioral therapist, you're going to be given homework, intellectual wellness. Some of that homework might be surrounding interacting with other people, social wellness. So you can see that these three are really impacting each other. And if we are not socially interacting with people, then we're not engaging our brain as much as we could. And so we're kind of almost becoming a hermit to ourselves emotionally. So you can see how either of these components, these three so far, if one is impacted in a negative way, they all three could, in the same way that if they're impacted in a positive way, then they all could. So going beyond emotional and intellectual and social wellness, we're going to dive into this idea of physical wellness. Now, this is a component of wellness that has been really interesting for people to see is a part of the work that we do here at Hope and Healing Therapy and Wellness Center, because, who would have thought that the physical, whether we're talking about nutrition or sleep or food, is a part of wellness? Well, let me just tell you, this is really important. So we can look at physical wellness from a nutrition standpoint. How are you feeding and fueling your body? You have to imagine your body as a machine. And in the same way that you're going to put fluids and gas in your car, you have to do the same thing, right? So gas is like the food of a car, and we have to make sure that we're putting the right kind of gas in the car that our car needs. And then fuel, the fuel is really all of those other fluids that we're putting into our car. So how much are you drinking during the course of your day? So much of our body is made up of water, and by the time we're thirsty, we are already becoming dehydrated. So you have to make sure that you are drinking enough water throughout the day. A lot of people say, well, I can't drink a lot of water. I don't like the taste of it. The more you drink it, the more you'll be used to it. Some people say, well, I can't drink a lot of water because then I'll be up all night using the bathroom. Okay, so maybe you start earlier in the day and you finish earlier so that you can not drink fluid so late into the evening. But I might also challenge you, are you drinking anything else in the evening? Are you having a cocktail or a beer or a soda or coffee or anything else in the evening, because maybe you change that to water so that you're making sure you're staying hydrated? And of course, nutrition. The food that we put in our body is key. If we are fueling our bodies with a lot of sugar and a lot of additives and a lot of processed food, it takes our body a lot of energy to be able to process that food. And some people, their bodies just can't do it. So the more whole food diet you can eat, according to whatever your doctor may recommend, if you have medical conditions, of course, but, good whole foods, fruits and vegetables. We live in a rural area, and it's great on a Saturday to go to the farmer's market and buy local produce. I love doing that. Even at the local grocery stores, they're bringing in local produce. Eating according to the seasons. I went to the farmer's market a couple months ago and I had fresh strawberries. I went the other day and they didn't have strawberries, but they had blackberries. So eating according to the season and knowing what our body needs for fuel. If there's times where you're super sluggish, yeah, we can grab a coffee or we can grab a sugary treat, and it's going to give us that really intense spike in our blood sugar and give us a little bit of energy, but then we're going to slump. So we're going to have more information on this podcast about nutrition and the importance of that. I hope to bring on some experts in those fields, because I'm certainly not an expert, but in my mental health training, we know that nutrition plays such a key role in our mental health. So it is definitely something that we talk to clients about when they come in and they say, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling depressed, whatever it is. People might be surprised that one of my first questions is, tell me about a typical day, because I want to hear, when are you eating? What are you eating? How are you feeding and fueling your body? As we feed and fuel our body, we also have to get physical activity. Now again, some people may say, well, I have an injury or there's a medical condition that limits me. Absolutely talk to your doctor, but I would be surprised if there's a doctor out there that says you cannot engage in physical activity. We have to move our bodies or we will lose them. It's the same thing if, again, going back to the car analogy, if you leave a car sitting in a driveway for months and months and months, it's not going to start. The same is true for our bodies. If we don't walk, if we don't move our bodies, if we don't lift weights, if we don't do the things that our bodies are intended to do functionally, then we're going to lose the ability to use our bodies. So thinking about the things that we need to do on a daily basis, we need to sit, we need to stand, we might need to squat or kneel, we might need to sit on the floor, we might need to reach or bend, we might need to lift groceries. We can look at functional exercise and we can say, what are the exercises that we would use to make sure that we're able to do those things? So for instance, a press might be similar to reaching into a cabinet to grab something out of it, or a squat might be similar to reaching down to pick up something off of the floor. Just thinking about functionally, what are the things that we need to do in order to live our lives, and what are the exercises and activities that we can do? And we can start small. Start with if you're not doing any physical activity right now, certainly you want to consult with your doctor, but maybe it's as simple as parking the car in the garage and then walking out to the mailbox instead of pulling up to the mailbox. Or maybe instead of driving the kids, school's about to start here in a couple weeks, instead of driving the kids to the bus stop, maybe you walk the kids to the bus stop. You park a little bit further away at the store, or if it's 1 or 2 flights, you take the stairs instead of the elevator. Just ways to get movement in that doesn't involve a gym membership or needing a personal trainer. But it's part of the reason why we strive to provide that within the Wellness Center component, because it gives people an opportunity to engage in physical exercise from professionals that know what they're doing, and it gives them guidance and education. It also adds to that social component. So we're really tying all of these things together. So you're hearing me talk about all these things that you have to do, engaging with people and self-care and activities and exercise and everything else, and you're probably thinking, yeah, I'm going to be exhausted doing all of this. And then I'm going to tell you, you got to sleep. Another component of physical wellness is sleep. So, they typically say 7 to 9 hours is what people need. On average is 8. I've heard people say, oh, I don't need that much sleep. I can get away with 3 or 4. Your body starts to adjust, but it never, ever catches up to what it really needs. So can you go with 3 or 4 hours of sleep a night? Sure, but eventually it's going to catch up with you. So going back to emotional wellness, what are your bookend routines? Sometimes it's good to start backwards and say, okay, this is the time I need to get up. So in order to get a good 7 to 8 hours of sleep, this is the time I need to go to bed. And maybe you just start slowly with adding in 15 minutes so that you can get a little bit more sleep. What impacts your ability to sleep? There was a time in my life where I could put my kids to bed at 8 o'clock and I could work out for an hour, take a shower, get ready for the day, get ready for the next day, and then go to sleep. So within 2 hours of bed, I was exercising pretty hard, but it helped me to fall asleep. Now I am not able to do that. I need to exercise earlier in the day. So looking at what's your caffeine intake, are you eating before bed, causing your body to really try to digest food instead of get sleep? How can you improve sleep? Sleep is so important. It's why we have a whole workshop on just sleep, because it is so important. The last couple of things are equally important. Just briefly touch on them. The first one is keeping our bodies free of or reduced exposure to alcohol and drugs. If we are putting things in our body that our bodies are not meant to process, it's obviously going to cause a problem. When I was preparing for this and I was thinking about how to explain this, it made me think of my husband has a diesel truck. And the first couple times that I was driving it and may have had to get gas, he kept saying, don't forget it's diesel, don't forget it's diesel. Because if I put regular gas in it, it would have really messed up the system. Well, think of our bodies in that way. Our bodies are not meant to ingest things such as alcohol and drugs and other substances, tobacco and e-cigarettes and those kinds of things. So we put it into our body, into our system, and then it really messes things up. We also want to make sure that you're seeing your doctor regularly, getting good checkups, making sure that physically things are well from a doctor's perspective. And if you're one of those people that haven't been to the doctor in a while, maybe this is an invitation to you to say, you know what, I'm going to do a checkup with my doctor, and I'm going to talk to them about what kind of exercise and good nutrition I should be engaging in. Kind of get all those things taken care of. And while you're there, the last component of physical wellness is medication safety, making sure that you're taking your medications as they are prescribed, you're not over or under medicating, and that you're also storing medications that are in a safe way, because we certainly don't want anyone getting those medications that shouldn't, because then that will impact their physical wellness. So we've begun to kind of come out of our own self. We've looked at emotional and social and intellectual and physical wellness. And, this bigger component of wellness we can look at is the spiritual wellness. It is another component that represents our own personal beliefs, our values. It involves us having meaning and purpose, a sense of belonging and balance, that higher power. And I certainly don't want to impose my beliefs on anyone else. So I would just invite you to consider what are your beliefs. And if you don't know, if you maybe were raised in a family that didn't talk about that, or in a culture that maybe was different than what you're living in now, and you're not sure what you believe, certainly those people that you associate with, your friends, your family, colleagues, might be a good place to start if you aren't sure, but really thinking about maybe when you're engaging your emotional wellness and you're doing some of that meditation, you might consider, or some of that reading, you might consider, what are my beliefs? How am I involved in that community? So if you are a person of whatever religious denomination or spiritual belief, are you engaged with people who have similar beliefs? Because we know that when there's conflicting beliefs, it can cause stress. So we want to make sure we're engaging with people that have similar beliefs as us. And are we making time for it? Again, going all the way back to emotional wellness, self-care, stress management, are you engaging in your own spiritual relationship with that higher power, that whatever your belief is, to understand your sense of belonging? It feels a little bit like we're switching gears a whole lot, but I just want you to kind of imagine this wheel. We've started with emotional wellness. We've moved into intellectual wellness. We've talked about physical wellness. We've talked about social wellness, spiritual wellness. And again, I said a few minutes ago, you're probably thinking, when am I going to get all this in? Well, now we're going to talk about occupational wellness, right? Because this is, what do we do during the course of the day? We work. The activities that help to, when we think about occupational wellness, we're thinking about the job that I do. But really, occupational wellness really speaks more to about what is my meaning, what is my purpose, what's my contribution to society, and are those things in conjunction with my personal interests, my values, my beliefs? Because if there's conflict there, then you're going to dread going to work every day. We really do spend, for some of us, more time at work awake than we spend at home. So finding wellness within our occupation is so important. What are the work relationships that you have? Is it a toxic environment? Is there a lot of gossip and Maybe it's not a trustworthy environment. Are the work hours not conducive to what you're doing? I'm certainly not telling you to go out and quit your job, but I am asking you to consider, are you involved in something that gives you purpose, that you feel valued, that it gives you value as well, and that at the end of the day, you're not just dreading the day that you just had and even dreading tomorrow, the day you're going to have. Is there, again, we talk about balance, is there balance between outside of work and inside of work? It's not going to be equal. It's not going to be this perfect scale, but am I able to enjoy my personal life, my spiritual wellness, my social wellness, my emotional wellness, my physical wellness? Do I have time to do all of those things while I'm also engaging in my occupation of whatever it might be? And do I feel accomplished? There are places that you can look online that can help you to do vocational assessments and really understand where you're best fit in terms of an occupation. You can certainly talk to friends and family, maybe that spiritual leader, or maybe you have a professional mentor that would be a good person that you could talk to about this. But certainly we know that if you're miserable at work with a toxic environment and you're just not feeling it, then it's going to impact all the other aspects of your life, because at the end of the day, you're going to be drained. So emotionally, you're going to be blah. Physically, you're going to be blah. You're not going to eat the right food. Maybe your go-to coping skill is, alcohol or drugs or something that's just not feeding or fueling your body. So it really does play a big part in our overall wellness. Certainly, what you're doing as a job impacts the next component of wellness, and that's financial wellness. Our satisfaction with our current financial situation and whatever the future holds is a huge piece of our financial wellness. Sometimes we have control over that, full control, sometimes we don't. Sometimes, society impacts us in ways that we're not prepared for, but, obviously you want to look at your work and what is your compensation for the work that you're doing? Where are you putting money? Where's your money going in checking and savings? And is there retirement and 401k? And what's your debt? Really having an understanding of the full picture. There are places online where you can find personal financial managers, or maybe your accountant can offer that service. Somebody that can really look at the full picture and help you to understand what's going on. Dave Ramsey has an excellent source of information in terms of being able to pay down debt and how to engage in spending to help reduce things. And it's hard because, I just told you that you're supposed to engage in all these self-care activities, and you're supposed to engage with friends and be social. Some of those things are expensive, or they cost money. And then I'm going to tell you have to be financially well. Again, it's about figuring out what works for you and figuring out what works within your budget. So maybe you're a person that can say, yeah, I love to get a massage, and I can get a massage, once a week. Kudos to you. Maybe you're a person that says, I can't afford to ever get a massage. Okay, so maybe you can look online and find ways to do myofascial release, where you can take a tennis ball and do some of your own massage at home. Again, you want to make sure that you're not doing anything that's going to hurt yourself, but, lots of things can be done without spending a lot of money. If you're in a place where you're not feeling financially well and you want to be able to reduce spending, reduce debt, and increase your security from a financial perspective. All right, last component of wellness is one that we may not have a lot of control over, but it's really important, and this is environmental wellness. This is our capacity to be safe and to feel safe. So we're looking at things like access to clean air and food and water, having places to live and to work and to learn, having pleasant and stimulating environments around you. So looking at things like this packet here talks about green living. So, what is your contribution to that whole idea of reduce and reuse and recycle? Do you understand what it means to, just reuse something? It seems silly, but, sometimes I use the grocery bags from the grocery store and then I use them as trash bags in my house. Sometimes I don't use the grocery bags at the store and I use my reusable ones because I have enough of the bags at home. It just seems like a little something that I can do, using a refillable water bottle instead of buying water bottles and having plastic. So what's a little contribution that I can make to the environment as a whole that can impact my own environmental wellness? Are you going outside? Are you engaging in the environment around you? Now, some of you may be listening and you're thinking, I live in a place where it's not safe for me to go outside. It's not safe for me to engage. And I totally get it. But can you drive to a place that's safe? Can you drive to a park that is more safe for you? Can you drive to a friend's or a neighbor's house that allows you to sit outside and enjoy some fresh air and sunshine that's not, a city and filled with smog and pollution? Thinking outside of the box. And then what is your home and your work environment? Is it cluttered? Is there a lot of trash and debris? Is the space itself, does it make you happy? Again, you might not have a lot of control over that, especially if you live and work with other people, because obviously other people are engaging in that environment. But what can you do to maybe provide a little space for yourself? If I have clients that come in and let's say they're in an unsafe environment, it's hard for me to engage fully and completely for emotional wellness if they're still in that unsafe environment. So we want to make sure that we can do the best that we can for emotional wellness. Keep in mind, none of this is perfect. None of this is going to be, that moment where it's like, oh, the angels are singing and it's perfect, because it's not. Seasons change, things change. There's so many variables, and what works for today might not work for tomorrow. What works for me might not work for you. But looking at what are the little things that you can do that can impact all of these components of wellness. It might require you to embrace and engage the support of other people. You may have a friend that looks like he or she has it all together. Maybe you ask them to have coffee and you sit down and you chat about it, and maybe what's one little thing that you can do that improves one of these aspects of wellness. And then how can you create that into routines and habits? We are going to take a deep dive into habits and routines. How do we make them? How do we keep them? How do we change them when our seasons change? But I invite you today to consider, what does my morning look like? What does my evening look like? What do the chunks of time during my day look like? When I look at these 8 components of emotional wellness, where can I make a little tweak? Where can I change just a little something that's going to help to impact my day? I'm looking at social, emotional, spiritual, intellectual, physical, environmental, financial, occupational. Where's one little thing that I can start? We start with baby steps, and then baby steps become full-size steps, and full-size steps become giant steps, and before we know it, we're jumping because we're gradually making these changes. So, I wanted to bring this information to you today because some people just don't understand how what I eat impacts my mental health, and where I live impacts my mental health. But as you can see, we really built off of, and it didn't matter if I started with emotional wellness or if I started with environmental wellness or started somewhere else, they are all interchanging, or they're all interacting with one another, and they're all really important for our overall wellness. This was a lot of information, and I hope that if you took value in this, that you'll share it with someone else. Stay tuned and subscribe and follow to the podcast for more tips and tricks and tools that we're going to be putting into our podcasts to help you be able to dive into each of these components of wellness and to really be able to look at how can I make changes. We only have control of what we have control over. We don't have control over what other people do, and really just looking at what is it that I can control. I can control how much water I drink. So let me invite you to go fill up your water cup and drink it. I can control how much exercise I get. So take this as an invitation to go for a walk. I can control how and when I engage in self-care. So maybe you sit down and meditate, or listen to some music, or go to a social event with a friend, right? And the more that I embrace the things that I can control and make the changes or improvements or tweaks that I can, the better I'm gonna feel getting into this idea of kind of holistic wellness from the 8 components of wellness. So again, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. If you have questions, if you have input or ideas, I would love to hear them. You can email me, Jennifer at hopehealingtherapy.com. You can also find us on Instagram and Facebook. We'll link that stuff in the show notes so that you can see it. And I invite you to take one little baby step towards one of these components of wellness. Have a great day.